Hi everybody, it's Amanda, or the Declassified Adoptee. So I want to use some of these videos to cover again some of the stuff that I've covered years ago, maybe 11 or 10 years ago on my blog, but it probably needs to be updated. It's been a decade. Maybe you would really love to hear some historical context behind it. I'm going to try and use some of these videos in a way of being different than what's on my Instagram or Facebook or my podcast or my blog itself, to kind of shed some light or some background on some of the things that I have already talked about in the past, and like, where do we go from here, or where have we gone from there? Today, the topic that I want to talk to you about is what some people who are newer to the adoption community, the question that some of you who have found us online may have: why don't many of us use the phrase or term birth mother or birth mom? First and foremost, whatever an individual mother or parent wants you to call them, you should call them. If some of us have a close and personal relationship with someone who is the first original birth mother or father to a child, if we think the way that they could be talking and referring about themselves is not respectful, then that might be something that you approach somebody with in the spirit of friendship, because you have an established relationship with them, and then it's appropriate for you to do that. Otherwise, if you are not someone's BFF who has their back and is invested in their personal growth, it's really not appropriate usually to correct someone about how they refer to their own role and their own identity within their own family system, and the family system that includes them and the child that they have surrendered for adoption. So that said, what do we do when we want to refer to this group of parents? What do we say? What's respectful and accurate overall? Old school, real old school, is not birth mother. The very first legally codified, socially accepted norm in adoption that we are able to see when we look back on records is that the biological parents of adopted children were called natural parents. Natural just simply means biological, through nature. This became somewhat more socially complex as adoption became more publicly visible. There originally wasn't an issue with calling biological mothers natural mothers, because adoption was hidden. It was sealed, it was hidden. The adoptive family had the choice to present their adopted child as their own natural child. So there wasn't this like dichotomy between adoptive mother and natural mother and who's more real at first, because people just weren't talking about adoption. But as adoption became more socially acceptable and it was in the news, adoption agencies started to rise in their popularity and in their marketing practices. There became more of a conflict, especially when cases, like a few really salacious cases, hit the news. Natural mothers trying to take back adoptees that they had felt were wrongfully taken from them, and that just inspired fear in the media and in adoptive parents about women who don't often get a voice to represent themselves. That is when we started to split into, well, what is more comfortable for particularly adoptive parents who at that period of history were like really fearful. They weren't connecting directly with the original parents of their children yet. When you don't know someone personally and have a connection with them personally, it's really easy for any of us to be afraid of someone, or to misunderstand someone, or to just be very wary of them. What would make new parents now adopting children feel more comfortable? That kind of arose the term birth mother. There are sources out there that credit someone with being like maybe the first agency or the first adoption worker to coin the phrase. That is not something I have off the top of my head right now. The term birth mother arose. People not knowing the history or why we're now using different language, that's when people start to kind of like self-justify and like make sense that it must be that way for a reason without really questioning why we do it. As a result of the language shift, people regarded it very much as a term that put a birth mother in her place. Her relevance or her value was limited to birth. And the adoptive mother is the one who wipes the noses, ties the shoes, is there for the sicknesses, is there for all the hard stuff. That's the real mom. So the term birth mother became, if it was not outright invented for, a way to limit a parent's value to birth only. Now, some people will say, oh, well, it's just describing that that's what she did. That's what she gave birth. And they don't mean to like in a overt way limit her value to just birth, but that is, it's still kind of the same. It's a little nicer, but it's along the same vein. So when I emerged into adoptee activism about 11 years ago, that concept of birth mother being to kind of limit her value had started in some popular social circles to just not even be enough. There was an entire online movement. I mean, it may still be going on today. This movement felt even threatened by putting value on the birth and genetic experience between adoptees and their first mothers. There were people in very visible places who then tried to equate birth mother with sperm donor. They would kind of make mentions of birth mother with things like birth woman and other kind of like really weird, I don't even remember what they all are. I do remember birth woman. I was in a conversation where that happened. It's equating women to being just factories for babies that have no value, to infer that it is insulting by comparing it to a sperm donor. In the United States, it's kind of like a euphemism or a derogatory way to assert that a father has kind of abandoned his children and is like an absentee parent. And so it's kind of, it's using the way that fathers have been insulted and sperm donors have been insulted in that way. It's taking an insult and trying to transfer it onto women who have surrendered children to adoption to further limit their value. Also, it's incredibly dehumanizing to them as people. This is when I met a great many number of my very cherished to this day donor conceived individuals who are great allies to adoptees. They rose up and they said, there are thousands of us gathering online to try to establish for everyone how we should be allowed to value our sperm donor fathers, how you should not insult someone for being a sperm donor because that is the genetic father of us and we feel insulted, and it's okay for you to value and even want to find your sperm donor father. And people who are using sperm donor as insults or trying to then translate that insult and making it take off infectiously towards birth mothers or first mothers in adoption, you are also hurting our community and you're hurting the adoptee community. And as their allies, we don't like that. Thanks, guys. At that time in history, at least 10 or 11 years ago, if not sooner, if not a little further back, this is when older mothers from post-war to pre-Roe, that's where they were like, you know what? I've always called myself a natural mother because that's what I was called when I surrendered my child to adoption. You had mothers who had surrendered their children were younger who are like, knowing all of this and seeing all this unfold, I want to be called a first mother. I need to be referred to respectfully. If you're going to do that to the term birth mother, then we need to normalize something else because that's not respectful. And then you had people who are very much like, I'm comfortable with being called a birth mother because it wasn't presented to me disrespectfully. It's not used disrespectfully in my adoption arrangement with my child's family, and so leave me alone. Wow. I use the term original. To me, it is very factual. It elicits that psychological and sociological term family of origin, and it repackages it in a way that's more appropriate and culturally and sociologically and psychologically informed for adopted people. In psychology, adoptees are kind of lumped into your family of origin is now your adoptive family, but all of the things that we might investigate about a family of origin as sociologists or social workers or psychologists don't fit the adoptive family. So we're just kind of supposed to pretend that it does, I guess. I use original family, mother, father, birth certificate, because I am trying to modernize the concept in people's minds of family of origin. It also doesn't insult anybody. It's also accurate. That to me is just, it's my way of being it's my way of being true to myself, accurate and respectful, the least amount of conflict that I could possibly have with someone new to adoption where I don't know what their labels are. And it's just, I find it useful. Some people say first because it's very much like original. It's also very accurate. It also isn't as emotionally laden or heavy with judgment or some of that historical baggage. That's fine. This is some of the history. This is how we got to where we are now. Maybe people aren't as familiar about the history of terms that we have used in the past to refer to different members of the adoption constellation. And now you have this information when it comes to whether you want to write about adoption and be respectful, whether you're going to encounter adoptees and adoptive families and original families or first families in your work and you want to be respectful, if you're considering what's respectful in terms of referring to yourself or your child's other mother. I think it's helpful for people to be able to make fully informed, self-regarding, self-respecting decisions by knowing where these terms have come from and what they were originally intended to mean. At the end of the day, it doesn't so much matter to me what your opinion on something is or what you call yourself, as long as you go to bed loving yourself and one step closer to liking who you are. Thanks, guys.